Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jennifer Bober, and I work in marketing and communications here at Renew International. We are thrilled to have you here with us for this next iteration of our Women in Conversation series. Before we get started, I do want to do two little bits of housekeeping just to tell you. One, this webinar is being recorded, so watch your email in the next day or two, and you will get a link to the recording. And also, if you have any questions as our conversation goes on, please put your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen or wherever your toolbar has landed. I know it'll pop up in different places for different people. And we'll be happy to try to get to your questions at the end of the conversation. And our conversation today is with Stephanie Peddicord. Stephanie is the president of the Center for FaithJustice, which is an organization dedicated to inspiring the next generation of leadership within our faith, working with organizations to establish programs for young people to work to further justice in the Catholic tradition. What a great ministry to be part of. We're so happy to have her here with us today. So welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you so much. I'm so thrilled to be here, and greetings to everyone that's out there in cyberspace. I'm delighted to be here and be part of this conversation and this great initiative to hear from women lay people in particular and what inspires us to lean into our faith.
Well, this is, we all know that faith is a journey. And so my first question for you is, tell us a little bit about your faith journey. Who were some of the major influences in your life? What brought you to where you are, working for a Catholic organization like this?
Yeah. I think I tried to come up with a creative answer to this, and my faith journey starts out pretty boring, as I think a lot of people's does. I'm a cradle Catholic. I grew up in New England. My parents were both grew up Catholic. I was baptized in the same small Catholic church where my dad was baptized, and his dad before him, and his dad before him. So I sort of grew up in this very traditional, not to date myself, but 1980s parish community. My parents were very involved with the parish picnic, and my dad was on the finance council, and they chaired the bishop's annual appeal when they still called them the bishop's annual appeals. And we lived this very rich sort of traditional parish life. So in hindsight, it was sort of this beautiful community-based experience that doesn't necessarily translate to present day. I think it does for some people, but not for a lot of the young people that we see are not part of those traditional parish experiences. I went to Catholic high school, and for a long time, that was sort of my life. It was just sort of fully integrated. You grow up as a young person in Massachusetts, and you knock elbows with a lot of Catholics. So we're sort of surrounded by people of a shared faith tradition. But I was very fortunate that I had those very boring catechetical roots, and a family that really was deeply committed to bringing us up in this faith. But then I started to veer off, as many young adults do. I went to a private secular college. My dad's an alum of Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts, and much to his dismay, I applied to 0.0 Catholic colleges, and very sort of went through a rebellious stage where I said, I want a private secular experience. And where I went to school was almost antagonistic to being religious. That was the dawn of sort of multiculturalism and exploring identities and different things. And being a token Catholic in those classrooms was not necessarily a fun place to be. But I think in hindsight, I grew a lot in my faith during that period of time, and ultimately went on to be married in the church. We have been very fortunate early on in our marriage to find a parish community where we did we did find a home, and our children have since been baptized there and received their sacraments there. So, it's been, you can sort of see the thread throughout my life for sure. But in those moments where I drifted, I know we'll talk a lot about service during this conversation, but service for me was my tether. It has always been my tether and my tie back to my faith. And it's only through adulthood that I've really come to see how intimately connected those two are for me. They are inseparable from me. So whenever I'm feeling distant or frustrated or having a little bit of a faith, I won't call it crisis, but a faith challenge, I get myself reoriented through service, and then I find my way back to the gospel very squarely through those experiences.
What a wonderful way to look at it, and what a wonderful tether to have.
Yeah. I
So
was really fortunate that I was surrounded by people who really valued. This was sort of, I went to high school in the 90s, and service has become prolific. It's become
yeah.
it's a requirement of confirmation. It's a requirement of public school. It's a requirement of National Honor Society. All of these things where it's become this very mandated check the box sort of practice, but that was not necessarily the case when I was in high school. So I was fortunate. I had teachers who really valued it and were exposing us to stuff, even at a time when it wasn't necessarily popular or common practice. And that to me opened my heart up to all sorts of things, and ironically, ultimately led me through the Holy Spirit to my role now at the Center for Faith Justice. So I'm very grateful for those experiences.
Your bio talks about having like deeply transformative experiences in service. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and why do you think that this has such a power within a faith context?
Yeah, I think it's a really essential question, and it's something for me that I've reflected so much on. I mean, part of it, it's just occupational hazard, right? Where I'm constantly asking the young people on our programs to reflect on these things. So it sort of forces you to think back and reflect on sort of the mile markers or the signposts in your own faith journey. For me, I was always, even as a young child, if I think back to what called me into this line of work or what called me into this vocation, I remember really vividly, like sitting in front of the TV. The Ethiopian famine was happening when I was a young child, and I just remember being so emotionally wrought over that, and how can this happen, and what can I do about it? And my mother would sort of scratch her head and say, it's in Ethiopia. There's not a heck of a lot that you can do, but we can collect money. Operation Rice Bowl was just getting started then through Catholic Relief Services. So, it was sort of, I had this yearning in me, even from a very, very young age, to do something service related with my life, and then started to do some more community service. But it was really in high school, and I had a Spanish teacher. I laugh because this would never happen now. Our Spanish teacher had an uncle who happened to be a priest in Juarez, Mexico, and he convinced our parents to put us on an airplane, and we flew to El Paso. We hopped on a school bus and crossed the border. I mean, it would never happen now. We lived with families. There were no background checks. There were barely any supervision. The chaperone, we after service every day, it was a lot of, just free time. In a shanty town, we lived next. I remember we lived with families next to a garbage dump, basically. So for me as a high school student, I was a sophomore, between my sophomore and junior year of high school. So to be there immersed in that space, I went on to major in Spanish in college. So linguistically, it was deeply appealing to me. Culturally, it was fascinating. And to just be there in that space, immersed with a family that cared for me as if I were one of their own. And it was 10 days, but you form those deep connections and bonds. And it was so transformative for me. You know, we say it just sort of breaks your heart open. And how do you start to see people through empathy and compassion and understanding and mutuality? You know, I was the same age as many of the children in that house, and the father, you know, went to work every day. There were so many parallels between their lived experience and my experience, but yet we were living these vastly different lives. So coming in it from this, I mean, now we would use the language of privilege and whiteness, coming into this space and immersing myself in that space was just so eye-opening for me, and has never left me. And that was the first of many journeys. Part of it is it feeds my desire for travel and adventure. But yeah, that was the first of many. I've taken many trips. I've been to Peru and Kenya, and many times to Appalachia, and of course many close to home service experiences. And then most recently, we've taken several trips to the US-Mexico border to greet and welcome people that are seeking asylum coming across. You know, so that first trip really does, and you know, shocks your senses a little bit and says,
Yeah.
oh, the world is so much bigger than myself. And who am I as a young person of faith, newly confirmed, age 16, stepping out into the world and saying, I've been given this faith by my parents. I've been a recipient of all this. At that time, it was called CCD still, you know, given all of this religious education as a, you know, depository here. But who am I now as an agent of faith? And our teachers, no one was using that language yet, but that for me has really shaped and informed our work at the Center for Faith Justice around agency and protagonism.
Wonderful. So, what connections are you trying to inspire in young people to make between social justice service and the Catholic faith?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, this has been one of the great conundrums. And for me, it's the greatest source of potential and energy in life within the Catholic Church, because you look around at our world today and there's so many problems. Pick a problem. And our we have a generation of young people who are super passionate about social change and social justice. And our faith, and I think that they haven't made the connection, and we as a church have not built the bridge for them, you know, because they're not going to walk across it on their own. Our faith speaks into these topics really vividly and beautifully and amazingly. So they don't see that, listen, your faith is a conduit to explore and address and lean into these issues in a really extraordinary way. So don't view them as separate. If you view them as connected and in an inextricable way, that's like your superpower. Don't separate them out. These two coming together are where the magic starts to happen, and where real social change starts to happen. And you know, I get so animated about this because this is it, church. We're having this conversation around young people and the hemorrhage. If you look at the data, and I won't get too much into this, but we live a lot in the data at the Center for Faith Justice, because this is what we do. And we're doing active innovation and research around, okay, young people are leaving at historic numbers. 8 out of 10 baptized Catholics no longer practice by the time they're 21. So I look at my own children, whose kindergarten silhouettes are behind me, one who's age 9, one who's on the cusp, she's 13, she's on the cusp. The data says that this is the age where she starts to walk. So I've had very tough conversations with both her and my parish staff saying, what are we giving her to make her, to tether her to this faith in the long term. And for us, we know at the center, it's these tangible experiences and meaningful experiences of encounter, accompaniment, and making them feel like they're protagonists. You're the main character. You know, your parents have given you this, or your grandparents in many instances, your family has given you this gift of faith, but you're the main character now. Nobody's going to write the story for you. So what about it speaks to you, and what are you going to, how will you use it? How will you engage it in the long term? And by the way, your passions really clearly align with that faith. So don't view them as separate pieces. How did those two come together? And as Pope Francis says in Christus Vivit, and in all of his, anytime he talks about young people, he says, help them to find their joy, help them to find that intersection, because that's where the magic happens. And that's where our church thrives. So for us, helping them to make those connections, helping them to bridge, to see those connections. And
the thing is so many, I mean, I know that when, we talk to adult Catholics, how many of them have no clue what Catholic social teaching is?
Right.
Like that, like even that phrase is foreign to them. It's like, wait, the church teaches about social issues? Yes.
Well, Jennifer, I'm going to reveal something to you, which I don't share a lot in public, which is that you heard my faith journey, Catholic educated through and through. I had never heard the term Catholic social teaching before I started working at the Center for Faith Justice. I said, I've never heard, what are you talking about? It is, I mean, we make this joke, and it's a terrible joke about it. Did Catholic social teaching be the best kept secret of the Catholic Church? And it's like, why are we hiding this under a bushel? This is our best, this is it. This is the intersection of what we believe and how we live and exist in the world. And especially, I think, for young people, they're not going to make that connection on their own. We have to point it out and be really explicit about it and say, okay, these two come together. What will you do about it? And it's our job as parish communities to empower and accompany you in that process of figuring out what this means to you. But we hear it from the adults who work with us all the time, our volunteers. I've never been asked these questions. I've never been called into a space of reflection. I've never been led through a conversation of what does this faith mean to me, and how am I going to be protagonist? And they've never been called into that, because generationally, that was simply not the case. We went to church on the weekend. We sat in the pew. We're part of this traditional parish structure in many instances, and that was that. But times have changed, and we're now leaning more into, again, these spaces of agency and imagination more and more around what does this mean to you? Because if it's going to stick in the long term, and I think that's the church is facing a lot of critical questions, but that's a really critical question. What is going to make this faith stick for this coming generation of young people? And I think tapping into that imaginative space is really essential.
And it's so true. I mean, I know in my own parish, we run a food pantry. And especially during the pandemic, that was huge. And we wound up getting to a point where there were literally 500 families every other weekend who were coming, and they had it. I mean, it was amazing to see, these massive bags of groceries, and the Elks Club across the street turned their lawn into a garden and were donating produce. But who were the people who were showing up to help distribute the food? It was students at Seton Hall University and different organizations. They found out about it, and man, they were there. And that intersection of faith and service is so appealing to young people.
And because it makes them come alive. They sort of say, oh, this is my space in the world. This is a place where I can lean into this and bring the best of myself to it. And it doesn't require anything more from me than that. Then showing up and saying, I'm here to serve. Here I am. What do you need me to do? And I think that just sort of getting out of the way and letting young people do that, part of what we talked a lot about at the Center for Faith Justice during the pandemic, as we were one, sort of living through it ourselves as individuals, but we're also in the business of accompanying parishes and pastoral staff. We kept coming back to when you looked around and you said, okay, what's happening in the church? If we close our doors, which physically happened, we close our doors and we can't gather sacramentally, what happens? Is the church still relevant? And you looked around and all of the media around, this is the church in service. This is us in action in real time. And we are as relevant as ever because this is us meeting community needs.
How do people know that, aside from the International Red Cross, that the Catholic Church is the largest charitable, service organization in the world, doing the most out there between, with Catholic relief services and, running food pantries and, we are the largest, second only to the International Red Cross.
And it's really, it's the best of who we are and what we're about. So again, I think part of it for the narrative with young people is helping them to see that, how do these pieces come together? Because you can't have one without the other. So it's a pretty impressive thing. I will say that, not that we want to go too deep into the pandemic rabbit hole, but if you looked at some of our youth delegations during the pandemic, we have instances, we're working on a project called Next Level right now, which is sort of an experiment. Honestly, it's a 5-year experiment. We're working with young people around, they design and implement, they create, design, brainstorm, implement a passion project. So something that they create emanates from them, and they do it in cohorts. So it's sort of the stuff of group project nightmares. And I said, oh, why did I design it like this? I hated group projects in high school. But they come together in collaboration with community. They assess a need and they say, we're going to create a project around this. And then it's their job to lead their parish in a campaign of sorts around that. So they've picked everything from mental health to immigration to food insecurity, intercultural dialogue and awareness. They've created some amazing stuff. But we have instances where during the pandemic, we have a couple of parishes that I won't disclose on here, who completely shut down. No online mass, no online giving, no online anything, just closed. And the Next Level ministry was the only active ministry during those months of pandemic. The kids said, this is our moment. We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, we're on TikTok, and they do mental health. So, I mean, the data around youth and mental health during the pandemic was really distressing. So they said, this is our time. So they were doing Instagram lives. They were doing post-pandemic like action plans, what getting young people, they had like visiting experts, they were on fire. They said, this is our moment, because it came from within, it came from them, and it's their protagonism at work. So sometimes if we just get out of the way and let them do what they want, what they need to do, they sort of rise to the occasion in really extraordinary ways. So it's been a really pretty special thing to witness.
That's amazing and fantastic. So, talking about service, what role do you see Catholic women taking in the wider world of service and social justice?
I love this question. Because a part of it for many years, our staff was entirely women. At a certain moment, I looked around, I said, wow, all of the doers here at CFJ are women. There's something really special about women as doers. And, it goes right back to the women at the foot of the cross, to Mary Magdalene being the first the apostle to the apostles. It all stems back to those first women in the early church being really the cross bearers and saying, this is it. This is our moment, guys. Let's go. We have our command. So let's go. Let's build this church. But I look around now and all of my faith heroes are women. Sister Helen Prejean, Sister Norma Pimentel in the Rio Grande Valley. I mean, people just doing extraordinary things. And it's lay women too. But I have to say that I've come full circle on women religious in my life, because some of my most favorite people, Sister Pat McGinley, if you're out there today, Sister Pat, she's our pastoral associate at St. Anne's. She's SSJ out of Philadelphia. Some of our our favorite and most inspirational and people that have really just devoted their lives, both in service to the church, but then in service to their communities. And they sort of see, if you go to the border on any given day and you volunteer in some of these community organizations who are serving literally hundreds of migrants and refugees coming across day in and day out, you look around and the number of women religious who are there quietly, they got their shirts sleeves rolled up and they're just there for the work, because that is where the work is. You see the women leaning into those spaces, which is just so inspiring. I do think, we're having a moment within the church where we're having these really upper level conversations. I think part of that has been inspired by the Synod on Synodality. And if you look at the USCCB's report, questions around women in leadership are front and center. Concerns about women in leadership. Where are the women? Not just, I don't want, to just be on the periphery of the table, but where are women seated at that table? And it's been really, Pope Francis has done some pretty extraordinary stuff. I don't think he gets the credit that he deserves, opening the conversation around women in the diaconate. He just opened the ecclesial body of the Amazon. Women are at that table. They're not just present for the conversation. They will be fully equal voting members of those ecclesial gatherings. I mean, so some of this stuff is extraordinary. It's really, really extraordinary. So, looking at, I know there's some synodal cynicism, but we choose to lean into synodal imagination. And it's really captured our hearts and sort of said, if something positive is to come out of this, what could the role of women look like at the highest levels of the church? And I think it's very telling that Pope Francis tapped a woman to lead that effort. Sister Natalie is leading this effort on a global scale. So I live in hope, and at the same time, the role that we're already filling is so essential. You look at your parish communities and a lot of those pastoral staff, the women doing, I always say that the most thankless job at any given parish is the head of religious education, because she's dealing with crabby parents like me saying, competes with my kids sports schedule and I can't do it. But it's so many women doing the work of the grind of keeping our church functional and operational and spiritually grounded. It's sort of that both and I see that women are really the unsung heroes of that. So,
and honestly, it's one of the reasons that I love these conversations.
Yeah.
Because, there are plenty of women who, they don't see that. They don't, recognize their own agency.
Right.
And, what they have to bring to the church. And so, I love these conversations where they can say, hey, I can do that. That appeals to me. I like this. And, I look, even my own parish, yeah, we have a woman who runs the, religious education, and it's the sisters, and these are the people who are doing so much of the work in the church, and everyone, it's like the priest is, the visible figurehead, but who's actually getting stuff done so often?
Right. I mean, it's all of the women behind the scenes. And I think, yeah, I mean, I think that that piece around agency is really essential, because we're not, just, I think, as adults in the church, generally speaking. There was a Gallup poll before COVID. So this is like late 2019, of practicing Catholics. So this was a year post the McCarrick report, Pennsylvania grand jury. So a year after that sort of reverberation of, I grew up in the epicenter of the Archdiocese of Boston. So I mean,
Okay.
reliving that trauma a
Yeah.
couple of years ago. But so 2019, Gallup poll of practicing Catholics, 2/3 of adult practicing Catholics couldn't readily identify why they were still practicing. So you've got, these are the people in the pews
Yeah.
who are there, and they're scratching their head saying, why am I still here? Despite all of this stuff, the reemergence of the scandal, why am I still here? And to have 2/3 not readily be able to say, this is why. I think that this is our moment as church where we need to call people into agency and say, okay, it's time to have that conversation. Why? What about this appeals to you? Where are you finding your agency? How is the gospel calling you? How is the Holy Spirit calling you? And again, the world is this vast place. There are so many needs. There are so many places where God have given you these gifts and these talents and these skills. So how are you going to use them? and I think that adults, we have these conversations much more frequently with young people, because I think we see them and it's like, oh, if we don't, this is make it or break it time. If we don't capture them now, it's done. But adults need to be called into that space too. What about this resonates with you? What will make you continue to come back? And we have such a unique moment and opportunity to do that as church. So I hope that universally we embrace it.
And I know for myself, I got the question from, friends when everything exploded of, why do you stay?
Mm-hmm.
And I know that my answer was, because I am the church.
Right.
Because the church isn't the hierarchy. The church is the millions of people who walk out of that building on a Sunday and want to make the world a better place.
Right.
That's
Because of their faith, not despite it.
Despite it, right?
It's because
They walk
of it.
out inspired and say, I want to make the world better.
Right. Right. And Pope Benedict talks about, the Eucharist as the source and the summit. I'm called into this space every week to receive the Eucharist, so that I go out and take Jesus with me into the world, and I'm going to make a lasting change. We need to start to have those really intentional conversations, because I do think it's just a reminding, it's a reinvigorating of, there's something here. Let's just reignite that spark and make you see it in a new light. And you're lucky, I'm lucky, we're sort of immersed in these conversations all the time. So we're facilitating them all the time. So it's easier a little bit to be
Absolutely
in those spaces of reflection. But I think that everyone has the opportunity to really think on what does this faith look like for you, and how has it changed? How has it changed? You're not the same person that you were at 25 or 15 or 5 years old when your parents sort of passed this down to you. What does this mean to Stephanie at age 45? What does it mean to, my dad at age 80? What does it mean to other people outside of, and in every heart and mind within those pews. What does this mean to you? And I think we would have a much richer church universally if we weren't so afraid to have those conversations.
I in some ways grew up in a similar household in some respects, but dissimilar in that, my parents both, we had these kind of conversations.
Mm.
We did actually talk about these kinds of things. And I mean, it didn't hurt that, my dad's, fraternity brother from college was a priest who'd come over for dinner. And, so you had these, and our pastor would be a guest in our home. And so conversations around faith happened in our house.
Right.
Not just in the church.
Right.
But in our home. And yeah, it changes how you see things. It really changes how you look at the intersectionality of things. And it's not just, and I think is, in the building. And I think as women, the whole idea of domestic church, we so often take the leadership in that as well.
Right. I mean, I think part of it is occupational blessing, but my kids have been exposed to what I view as the best of the church. Other people would probably disagree with that, but my kids have been on many service experiences with me. My daughter's been with me to Appalachia numerous times. My son has been exposed to these different things. They've been to protest marches with me outside of ICE headquarters in Newark, where we stood next to Cardinal Tobin. And I told my daughter, I'm like, go get a picture with Cardinal Tobin. She's like, who? Just do it. And I'll explain after. We have, they've been called into these spaces. And for me, and again, this is the conversation that I've had with my pastoral leaders at my own parish, because I see what they're getting in faith formation, which is not necessarily the best. Very well-intentioned people, but it's just not, it's lacking in substance, it's lacking in imagination, it's lacking in innovation. So for me, that carrying that cross and saying, okay, this is on me to expose my kids, and at a certain point, they're going to have to make a decision for themselves, as all young people do. And I think increasingly they're making this decision of, there's a phenomenon of gone from faith, but not from church, or gone from church, but not from faith. They still have those religious yearnings, but they don't institutionally believe in this structure that we've created around church. So, for me, my priority is giving them a lived faith and a lived experience of discipleship that, again, will stick. What is it about it that's going to capture your mind and your heart? Because the richness of our Catholic faith, I'm biased, right? But no one else has this. The richness of our faith that calls us to the Eucharist and calls us to justice doesn't exist anywhere else. So I'm hoping that if I expose them to all this stuff, I've got a lot of like cool young adults. They don't take it from me. They follow the guidance of the young adults. So exposing them to these young adults who themselves are on their own faith journey, their own journey of vocational discernment. And they can see young adults that they admire, they think are cool and fun. And they're not afraid to be Catholic. They're not afraid to practice this type of stuff. They intend to do things in their lives relative to their faith. So they don't have to just rely on me, because then it all would be lost.
So being a professional musician, I used to sing actually for an Episcopal church and a Catholic church at the same time. And the kids in the choir asked me to be one of the chaperones for a lock-in at St. John the Divine Cathedral. And so they had been hanging out with these other kids. Okay, these kids are cool. But then when we started going through, they were going to have a service. And so they were going through music. The kids are like, Jen, ask them if we can do descants. So they're like singing. And these other kids are looking at them like, oh my God. And a couple of the kids, the adults got to me the next morning before we left, and they said, thank you so much. said, well, for what? She said, our kids were hanging out with the kids you brought, thought these are cool, we like them. And then they were singing. Cool kids can sing. Hey, can we start a choir?
Right.
And that whole idea of, when the kids see other kids they think are cool doing something,
Right.
they're willing to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's that peer influence and peer learning, and also intergenerational. Increasingly, so much of what we find is how important intergenerational dynamics are, because equally for the adults as the kids, right? Because the adults get more out of it than the kids themselves do. But those conversations of accompaniment and how do we learn and see ourselves in other people, and these are the essential functions that we need to be performing in order to again open people's minds and hearts to what their faith, to the great potential of their faith. I think is the exciting part. It's the challenging part. I mean, a lot of this is really hard work to do. How long ago was that lock-in? Because finding people to stay overnight at that
it had to be like 20, 25 years ago.
We've been fortunate. One of the stories, again, I tell about Sister Pat, I don't know if she's on here, but I'll send it to her afterwards, because she's one of the mentors on our next level journey, and she just turned 80 this year, and she shows up for all of the things, including overnight retreats. And we had one this past spring, and we had it at an outdoor retreat center, and she assumed that she'd be in a tent and all. And I said, Sister Pat, we're not going to ask you to come on this retreat, pop you in a tent and call it a day. She had her own room and heat.
But she was willing to.
But she was willing to. She showed up fully, God bless her, with the expectation. This is a woman whose life of service has been devoted to religious education, in addition to serving her religious community, wherever they sent her, wherever she was called to serve. She's still showing up. She's 80 years old and she's still showing up. I said, I hope that I am Sister Pat at age 80.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
We have a sister here who actually, she just did a retreat for my parish this past weekend. And yeah, I hope I am anything like Honora as I keep getting older.
It's good. I mean, that's why the Holy Spirit puts these people in our path, I think, to continue to inspire.
Our sheroes.
Yeah. To continue to inspire and say, listen, you think you're tired now, but I'm going to give you a second and a third and a fifth wind, so that you're still going for as long as I need you to go. Mm-hmm.
So what are your hopes and dreams for Catholic women in the future?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question too. I mean, I do think a huge piece of our work is around imagination and protagonism. I know for me, as my faith journey, delves deeper. I mean, my primary vocation is wife and mom, in addition to running this nonprofit organization. But my hope is that the church is here for my children and for future generations. That's not a guarantee in the way that it was before. The numbers are very dire. So I think if you look at what are my hopes and aspirations, I mean, just that our faith endures, even as the institution might look different, that our faith endures, and that my children carry it on to their children and on to their children beyond them. Because I do feel like this idea of servant leadership that is informed by a uniquely Catholic tradition. I do think that there's something truly unique and extraordinary about the Catholic tradition and our approach to social teaching that does not exist. We're part of a larger grant cohort with other denominations on this next level project that we're doing. And they say, where does the Center for Faith Justice exist within the Episcopalian tradition and the Methodist tradition and this tradition? And I said, I don't know. I just know that we within the Catholic tradition have this unique thing that is Catholic social teaching that is our roadmap. This is the intersection between what we believe and how we live. So that's a broader question around my hopes and aspirations for the church. For women in particular, I just, I hope that as women, we continue to forge our own space. We continue to, it's hard for me to even say I want a place at the table, or I want a voice at the table. I think that we need to be the leaders in the new imagination. What is the next iteration of the Catholic faith going to be? Because I do think that the institutional church is going to look totally different within a generation. And that script is being written now. And I see a lot of women writing that script and a lot of women leaning into this. And we have the creativity and I think an openness to imagination and maybe even risk that our male counterparts within the church don't necessarily have. So I really hope that we lean into that and embrace that great potential that we have the ability to write the script and inform the future of the church as we envision it. We don't need to wait for that place at the table. Well, I'll leave it at that before I start saying too much.
I like because Mayor Ernesto, and she and I have been working, with a resource based on the work of Helen Prejean, and talking to people who are looking to, have conversations about the death penalty and Catholic teaching in their parishes. And our last training that we did, it was all women. Mm-hmm. Including a wonderful woman from Louisiana who's, has heard Sister Helen multiple times. And the first time she said, I just wasn't there yet. Mm-hmm. And, and then she kept, working at it and reading and how she has now, looking to start these conversations in her own parish. And what a wonderful testament to her faith journey. But we're looking at, these women who, they're the ones who we said, you don't have to, it doesn't have to be an official, parish thing. You can do it with just a few friends of yours who happen to be in the parish. And then you've got advocates to then make it an official parish thing. But so often it's the women who are writing the script and, taking charge and leading things.
And again, it goes there. There's a historical precedent for everything. But all we need to do is go back to look at who was at the foot of the cross, who didn't run, who wasn't in hiding. And it was women. It was women. It was Mary Magdalene. It was, and on and on and on and on. So we need only to look to the gospel for that inspiration of how do we want to write our own narrative on what the future of the church could look like and should look like. So it's really exciting. And I would, for all the women out there that are thinking on, I'm very passionate about insert justice topic here. And no one talks about immigration in my parish. Nobody's talking about racial justice. Nobody's talking about women's health. Nobody's talking about these things, but I carry into this space questions and yearnings for those conversations. Just like we look at our young people and we say, what's your passion? Form a project around it. Or as you said, gather 2 or 3 in my name and start start a conversation. It really doesn't have to be any more sophisticated or complex than that. That is church. I think that we had so many synodal, what a gift of grace to facilitate synodal conversations. Yeah. But we had so many of those conversations where people came back at the end and said, I'm just struck by, this is church, us being here, talking about our joys and our challenges and our hopes and our difficulties and our criticisms. This is church, and us coming together in this healing space, in a circle, Zoom circle conversation. This is church. So it's really, to any woman that is seeking to lean, again, pick a topic and lean into it. And I guarantee that there are young people in your community that also want to lean into it. So find those young people and walk alongside them, because that journey will be mutually enriching.
And that's so much at the heart of the resource that, inspired these conversations, Women in Conversation, is that, is when we do experience our faith differently.
Mm-hmm.
And telling our stories to each other, you telling your story to this community, we all have a story to tell around our faith journey. And when we do come together and share them, great things happen.
Yeah.
They really do.
Yeah. One of the really interesting things, as we started this journey of Next Level with parish communities, is that we very intentionally put a mentorship component into it. And we would say to the parishes, non-staff, find adults in your community that are going to be willing to do this. And they would look at us like we had 10 heads. How are we going to find an adult that's willing to mentor young people? And then the mentors themselves would come to us and say, what do I possibly have to offer? I have no degree in theology. I don't know this. I don't know this. I said, you're an expert in your own faith journey. And that is enough. The Holy Spirit calls you to be an expert in your own faith journey and bear witness to young people who are journeying themselves. You don't need a fancy degree. You don't need to know the ins and outs of the gospel. You're there to be in conversation with them, and have an openness to hearing their questions and explore curiosity and all of that type of stuff. That's where this idea of accompaniment comes from. And for many parish staff who have said, Pope Francis has talked constantly throughout his papacy about accompaniment, but we've never once known how to do that. So thank you. Thank you for teaching us how to actually operationalize this buzzword. Their challenge, and it's one or two accompanying at a time. So the challenge for them is, how do we scale this? How do we do this on a much bigger level? And that's still something we're working through the kinks on that. Because it's a paradigm shift. It's a paradigm shift that a lot of parishes aren't exactly ready to make yet. But when they do, it's magic. It's not magic, it's the Holy Spirit.
Right.
The sneaky Holy Spirit, as Sister Helen Prejean would say, the sneaky Holy Spirit.
One of the questions that has come up, as how are we doing at connecting the ideas of love and charity with change and justice?
Yeah, we have these conversations a lot, especially with young people. And, we start with the very simple graphic of 2 feet of love in action, right? You've got charity. And I would say that the Catholic Church generally is really good at charity. We're really good at collection drives. We're really good at the diaper drives and the coat drive and the turkey drive and this drive. Donating stuff comes easily to Catholics. That's charity. Even doing service, going to the soup kitchen, your food pantry at your parish, all of these beautiful things that we do that are acts of charity and service. We see a need, we meet it immediately. Boom. We're really good at that. I think a lot of our communities really struggle with the other foot. And part of what we say to young people is, listen, it's real hard to walk on just one foot. It makes it a lot easier if you've got both feet, and you're going to get a lot further. You're going to solve a lot more problems if you got both feet. And that second foot is justice, and asking questions around not just, I'm going to donate a can to feed someone who's hungry, asking questions about why within the United States of America, with all of our abundant resources, do people not have enough to eat? Why are people hungry? And why within only certain communities are people hungry? Or why is it more prevalent over here? So leaning them into those spaces around both is really a gift. I think a lot of them have not had those conversations, have not. I do think generationally, they're much more ready to have those conversations. I mean, I went to Catholic high school. We never talked about social justice. And again, I had never heard of Catholic social teaching. So we definitely weren't talking about Catholic social teaching. But I think from a justice perspective, they're much more, they have the language, they have the awareness. I mean, this has been one of the blessings of social media and the prevalence of social media is that they have access to so much information. So these justice issues come to the fore and they are on it. They're way ahead of us. Generationally, they're 10 steps and 10 paces ahead of where we are. So I think helping them to sort of see, we need both. If people don't have a place to sleep tonight, I worked at Covenant House for a long time. So if I have any Covenant House people out there, Covenant House, first and foremost, was about immediacy. If a young person needs a place to sleep tonight, you're going to deny them a bed? You're going to deny them a shower? No, they need a place to sleep. Yes, that's charity, but asking, these critical questions around poverty and foster care and all of these interconnected pieces, educational disparities, those are equally important. And so how do we view them in relation to one another? That was a really long response. I don't even remember what the question was, but that is sort of the beginning of the dialogue for us. And it's for anyone that works in ministry with youth. I mean, it's a real simple graphic: 2 feet of love and action, charity and justice. And I think for them, it just gets the juices flowing around. Oh, I'm here, I'm doing service. That's good. That we're called by our faith to serve.
Right.
But we're also,
it's also that,
equally called to ask these questions.
We always talk about the why, but the why are we called to service is because we are meant to love our fellow humans.
Right. And see, I think part of it opens conversations up to this idea of the difference between service and solidarity, of mutuality, and how do I lead with empathy and compassion, the difference between sympathy, empathy, compassion, and how do we go across that spectrum and invite people into that space of seeing shared humanity. A lot of what we take away from our trips to the border and working with migrants and asylum seekers is that, this is a shared humanity. If I'm meeting a mother on the border who's traveled while pregnant across 5 countries by foot, by boat, in the back of like a Coyote's van to get to the United States, just for the hope, I have to put myself in those shoes and say, okay, let's talk about why and how, and meet that person with an attitude of love and of solidarity, and say, okay, I'm in this together, because human to human, I can relate to what it is to be a mother wanting to provide a safe space to raise my child. And that's what our faith calls us into.
Wonderful. Well, we're getting to almost 3:00 here. Stephanie, this has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. And I do want to share, let's go. It's going to jump me twice. There we go. This conversation really was inspired by our resource, Women in Conversation. And for more information about that, please go to renewontail.org/women. And there's a promo code. Don't worry, you don't have to write this down, because all this information will come to you in an email, and we'll share that with you. But I just want to thank again Stephanie. this has been a wonderful conversation to, talk to someone who is so engaged in Catholic service and to see how a woman is helping lead the next generation to really live their faith is just inspiring, I think, to me and hopefully to everyone who was on today and everybody who signed up so they can watch the recording because I know we get a lot of that.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for facilitating these conversations. And I've watched a number of them in the past, so I'm so honored to be asked to participate. And anyone that wants to carry on these conversations about young people and justice and accompaniment, feel free to look us up online. We're at faithjustice.org, and
I will include the link to your website in the follow-up email to everyone. So
yeah. So thank you again. This was a delight.
So thank you everyone for being with us. We hope you got as much out of this conversation as I did, and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. God bless. Bye.